Hello, everybody. I have Joe Szimhart with me today. It is my good fortune. Hi, Joe.
Hey, John, good to see you today.
Hmm. And for those of you who haven't noticed, I've got books behind me which are hostile towards Donald Trump. And I put up a piece with Jeremy Sherman last week to say, what do you think about this whole thing? And Jeremy pretty much has put up videos which have been very popular. He tells me he's had somewhere over 1 million views on them in all. And he wants to bait people who, not debate, but bait people who believe in Trump. And he seems to, I just take the point of view that I don't think this is very helpful. It, it's, using it as a kind of sport is given that, what hangs on this election that, you know, this is going to be the most powerful person in the world. And so I've done a little video which will go up probably alongside this, which is to say, how can you talk to people who are, let's use Hulk Hogan's term, Trump maniacs, people who have a passionate conviction. And this works both ways. This, as an outsider, as somebody who's looking at the US, and I've been watching the Trump thing for 10 years now, there is a terrible polarization in US society. I read an academic book about it last year. And the academics were saying this was actually been created by the political pundits. This is not a grassroots opposition. This is deliberate. And I wrote a whole book about it, a couple of professors. And it's kind of, and I've also read about what happened in the 50 years after the Civil War, the myth of the lost cause and all of this. And this is in the background, this kind of mythology. What worries me is a division where people can't talk to each other anymore. And you and I have both spent a lot of time talking with people who are maniacal in their beliefs, fanatical in their beliefs, fervent. And so what I've said is you've got to start by respecting the person. You've got to start by not by despising them or feeling superior to them, because that's just a cultic position, but accepting, if you like, to hate the sin but love the sinner, or at least be nice to the sinner. So,
Mhm.
and for me, the key moment was about 5, 6 years ago. I saw a video of two protest groups, what we'd call right wing and left wing, whatever that means, standing maybe a yard apart with megaphones, shouting obscenities to each other. And it was like, yeah, this is America today. How can we calm that down? And any thoughts about how to talk to somebody who's fanatical in general or in
Yeah,
particular?
yeah. So I've been trying to do that for 45 years.
Yeah, I've only
You
been doing
know,
it for 40 years. So,
so just to put this in context, when I would get hired to do an intervention, and usually I'd meet the person by surprise, they did not want to talk to me. So I'm immediately the enemy
mm,
in their mind.
yeah,
There's something suspicious about me and demonic or whatever the cult word might be. And so I've got to get over that. So the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes are spent trying to gain rapport,
mm,
showing respect, trying to reduce the heat in the room. Sometimes it would take a couple of hours. Sometimes I'd have to leave and let the family do it before the person would invite me back to talk.
yeah,
And then maybe in more than half the cases, I was able to get the person to start thinking about the group a little bit more and move into a determination stage that they determine that there's something wrong with the group and then act on it, meaning now they're beginning to ask me questions,
mm,
what I think about the group. So it's a compressed process of discussion and education.
mm,
And the education part is the most important part. And if you're going to be an educator about Trump or anything, you have to know what you're talking about.
yeah,
And of course you can't be arguing against the 10% and what I call a 10% rule. I think that the really avid Trumpers, the ones that people are most afraid of, are a small percentage of the ones that support
mm,
him and the GOP agenda.
yeah,
So the agenda is much bigger than Trump. He's just more or less the motivating factor the clown on stage that people like to jeer and cheer,
Mm.
but he brings a lot of attention as opposed to all the other candidates. They couldn't, perform as like he did, even though
JD
when
Vance
he's,
can't even order donuts.
yeah. And it's just him, he is so egregiously uh, uh, offensive
Mm.
toward people that don't agree with
Yeah.
certain points that he's making, that he polarizes people. He's a very
Mm.
polarizing figure, including in his own family.
Yes. Yeah, I
But
mean,
as
I'm
far
told that
as
his sister, who's a judge, I think, when he first was standing, made a public statement that nobody should vote for her brother because he was, and I quote, an idiot. So yeah,
yes,
his
well,
own family.
he's been called that by his old professors, by people that worked with him in the cabinet. Um, and I think what makes him, quote, an idiot, unquote, is that he is so narcissistic to the extreme that he refuses to believe that any of his thoughts are wrong.
Yeah.
And and he's been like that most of his life. It's the extreme of New Thought, that if you doubt what you believe, then you will suffer the consequences. So, he continues to uh, attack his critics and promote himself as a genius, which is idiotic, but it works for him to an extent. I don't ever look at him as having a cult following. That's
Mm.
where I deviate. And I've talked to the author Steve and others about
Yeah.
this. It again, it's an attractive thing to think of Trump with a cult. I just think he's more of a puppet
Mm.
of different forces, like that these guys like Bannon and others were able to influence him to change from being quasi-democrat to being quasi-conservative.
Mm.
He became a good front person, in other words, for them. They understand that they dressed up this clown to look like conservative, and he likes it because he's getting adulation, he's getting money. That's the bottom line for him. I don't think he's a runs a cult in the sense that he's a leader. I think he's a puppet of forces that he doesn't understand, nor does he care about.
Mm.
He'll say anything as long as he gets some kind of adulation. I mean, that's been him. And so, and I think the angry voter whose anger supersedes any kind of rational thought, like immigrants are going to take our jobs, they're going to rape our children, and we're angry.
They're going to
And
eat
so
our
we want to,
pets.
yeah, yeah, whatever. If you appeal to that 10%, they're going to make a lot of noise.
Mm.
They're going to love you, and or that the government that we have is a fascist government, is what they're saying. We want to get past the New Deal, go back to when America was great. I don't know what the hell they're talking about, because
Mm.
the problem that I think that Trump promoters don't get is even the slogan of MAGA, "Make America Great Again." It implies force, that you force America to be great again according to certain values, and that's what they're trying to do. For instance, becoming a super Christian and having no abortions and whatever. These kind of fundamentalist evangelical Christian planks that they're,
Mm.
10 commandments in every school and things like that are to me promoting what I call, what's called in hermeneutics, eisegesis, meaning personal interpretation
Mm.
trumps any kind of rational working definition of the Bible, the Constitution, the way people are in terms of self-identifying. That their view, you have to be male, female, and nothing in between. Um, that might be true on a raw, crude biological level. In most cases, when you talk about nature, there has to be this bipolar male female to have sex, right? But human beings aren't only that. We are also psychological, aesthetic,
Mm.
mythical. We're we're religious. we go far beyond that, and so we have wide variations in our religion. We have wide variations in our gendering, self-gendering,
Yeah.
and it can change. This is who we are. So to have a proper government, you have to accommodate that. And I think even most Republicans understand, the majority do, but they can't let the voters know that they're weak
Mm.
on certain things. Like for instance, I don't think most Republicans are all that worried that there are abortion clinics for people that don't want them. But maybe on principle they don't like it, but they don't want to force the government on that. Even Trump waffles on that.
Oh
He got a
yeah,
little
he's been
edgy
both
about
sides in the last
about
few
the whole
months. Yeah.
abortion thing. Yeah, and so that's why I think he's really a poor leader.
Mm.
He's more of like a cheerleader,
Mm.
in this sense, not a proper leader. And I think he's being led and being misled by Guenonism, by Bannonism, by uh, any of these advisors he's
Well,
picked up on.
Muskism at the moment, isn't
And
it?
now Muskism,
Mm.
or let's call it wealthism,
Mm.
you
Yeah,
know,
the
because I'm
the
wealthy,
Billy Club.
I
Yeah.
can dictate reality because I have $1 billion. Well, I must be brilliant. So
Mm.
therefore I can also talk philosophy and talk religion and talk, you know, whatever. Um, I don't know.
I know
I'm kind
more
of rambling
about
here,
that than
but
anyone else, I think is the expression he uses. I know more about weapons than anyone else. I know more. Somebody did one of the comedy shows did clips which say, I know nothing about that, which is one of his statements. He knows nothing about Project
yeah,
2025. I think he should find out about it. And I know more about that than anyone else. And that he moves between those two poles. And when there's anything specific requested in terms of what he knows about something. Like he has concepts of a plan for healthcare. He's only had 9 years to think about it.
yeah.
I think you're probably right that, probably because I'm writing about it at the moment, but Ludendorff and Hindenburg, who had the governance of Germany, decided that Hitler would be a safe puppet. And so, although he'd only got 30% of the vote, they made him chancellor in January 1933. And within a very short order of time, he got his opponents in prison and he'd got the governance of the country and drove the country into war,
Hmm.
and the world. But in his case, although he was not an intellectual, he was not a man who worked things out, he certainly, from the look of him, we could readily call him a narcissist. But he did take control. With Trump, what seemed to happen, I agree with you, is that Steve Bannon, the Mercers,
The
this
Koch
little,
brothers, Musk,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly, this little group of people had influence upon him, and he moved away from that influence. So the puppet took power, but the influencers were pushed away. So
Well,
that
that's the danger here, of course, and I think you're right about Hitler. He wasn't quite as charismatic until he learned how to use it. Now, one thing different here is that Trump cannot give a speech. He stumbles through sentences all the time. He can't stay on track. Hitler could. Hitler could. He would practice. He
mm,
would choreograph, and
mm,
he understood mass influence. With the technology he had.
mm.
I think that Trump is too scattershot, and I think that he essentially undermines himself.
I
You know,
think
he,
so. I think so.
because he is an idiot. He doesn't understand the limits of his own ungenius.
Mm.
So that's part of his problem.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is watching him that he had a rotten childhood, he had a rotten father. I mean, his
Oh
brother
yeah,
drank himself to death. His older brother. If I've remembered rightly, he was sent off to boot camp when he was 14 because he
yeah.
was unruly, and he was broken and tamed during that process, as people are. That is the point of it. That you're making somebody obedient. You're making them do what you
Hmm.
want. I think that he developed a form of self-soothing where he can tell himself how incredible he is. And it's so powerful that it excludes any external evidence. You know, the confirmation bias is I am a very stable genius and I wash using beautiful clean coal. You know, clean coal. Have
Mhm.
you ever seen clean coal? I'm yet to see that. But he grabs hold of these things. I mean, this last week, yeah, having a go at Jimmy Kimmel for 6 months ago, what he said at the Oscars. And what he said at the Oscars, he read out a tweet that Trump had made. And Trump refers
Yeah.
to it and it says, he read my truth. You know, my
Uh-huh.
truth. What I'm saying is the truth. And 6 months ago, he did this. And you're kind of going, this is a presidential rally. You're talking about being slighted 6 months ago on a
Okay.
TV show.
Let me slow you down here. The reason that appeals to the 10%, and I'm using 10% as a
Hmm.
metaphor because the old saw is that the only 10% of Germans joined the Nazi Party, which is more or less true.
Yeah,
But there's many more.
45% of medical doctors, go figure.
Yeah. Well, it was about power and it was about
Hmm.
influence and it was about, fear as
Yeah.
well. And the others went along with it, obviously, because they were getting something out of it. The economy was coming up and people were working and whatever. Germany was getting its pride back, whatever that is. So
Make Germany great again.
yeah, so I think
Mugger.
in terms of talking to someone that's pro-Trump and will not change their vote,
Well, but
uh,
it's not that 10% I'm interested in. They're not going to change their vote.
no, I'm
What you're
talking about
suggesting
anybody.
is there are 90% who might. How do we talk to them?
Well, I have done it,
Yeah.
and I think that it takes time. One, you show some respect. You try to find some shared values.
Hmm.
For instance, I can agree with the idea that no one should have an abortion. Because I think life is worth preserving on principle.
Hmm.
But should I impose that based on some kind of a religious notion I have about life on the entire nation? That's a different question.
Hmm.
So it is a matter of choice, and it has been throughout human history. I mean, the whole idea of infanticide and some kind of abortion has been around since human beings have been around.
Hmm.
Like for instance, it's not just the Chinese, but the Romans, killing a female infant was no big deal to them.
Yeah, Plato's very happy in the Republic to suggest infanticide. The
Right,
Spartans were meant to
right.
be famous
And,
for it.
and
Yeah.
this whole idea of eugenics
Hmm.
that drove, the Hitler mania
Hmm.
into the Holocaust is something that we all know started in the United States. It was all part of social Darwinism, it was all part
Well,
of
I
cleansing the
beg
race.
I beg to differ. It started in England with
Oh, it
the
did. But
Eugenics Institute by Francis Galton, which
oh,
and
I'm sorry, but it
exported
was
to America.
okay. But it was energized. It was energized in the United States.
Absolutely, and
Okay, yeah,
where Winston Churchill in around about 1911 or 12 tried to get an act to sterilize the feeble-minded in this country,
right.
that was not acceptable. In America, I think 60 or 70,000 people were sterilized under the eugenics laws of the different states.
Yeah,
So,
I worked. I
and it's
worked.
continued actually under Trump that
Right.
women who were taken into the immigration camps were sterilized forcibly under Trump.
Yeah.
It happened here during the second COVID-19 lockdown. Our esteemed idiot Prime Minister Boris Johnson put "Do not resuscitate" notices on Down syndrome people who'd caught COVID and those who were learning affected. So
Right.
eugenics, in some form or other, has persisted. But yeah, the massive movement was the US, Sweden. Hitler
Hmm.
even wrote a letter to the president. I can't remember who it was. It was maybe Hoover at the time, congratulating him on the eugenics program. What a great
Yeah.
idea this is. I think we should do it too. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So I worked in an institute, the Pennhurst Asylum, which shut down in the 80s. But I worked there in the early 70s when it was beginning to shut down. It was one of those places set up for brain damaged and retarded. It had about 3,000 people crammed in
Wow.
there at one time. And they had a form of sterilization
Yeah.
going there in the 20s and 30s. So
Those
the
such
instinct.
those such people very rarely breed. Let me give a capping number on this. That in Mannheim, Germany,
Mhm.
when of course, 250,000 schizophrenics were either sterilized or murdered under the Nazi regime. So we come up to the modern times, and my question was, well, does that make any difference? Well, in Mannheim, Germany, where there are about 300,000 people, they rate, I think it's 58 schizophrenics per 100,000. In 11 other countries, the rate is 24. So that extermination program had no effect.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a disgusting way of othering people and making yourself feel superior.
But I think it's a human instinct. I think, it's still around. We fight it all the time in terms of what we might call social science and so this stuff is very new to us as humans, like women's suffrage, the fact that slaves can vote, that's really new, and we're still in that struggling phase. So, and I think when you look at when you talk to someone that's a pro-Trumper, if they can begin to understand that they are part of a force of history that just will not let go of certain notions, racist notions and anti-feminist notions, like Rush Limbaugh used to call them feminazis. In other words, the language, it can change the way people view this sort of thing, and it takes generation after generation of hard work, changing the laws and constant education to get rid of this impulse that we have to go back to Plato's Republic, from 2,500 years ago. It was some concept he had. We still have that impulse, I was talking to you earlier about Hobbes and Rousseau. Hobbes with Leviathan and having a monarchy as the ideal form of government. Rousseau, on the other hand, thinking that some version of the democratic Edenic state of human beings and that they will be naturally good if you let them alone, kind of an idea. Of course, both ideas don't work very well, but if you did it in their pure form. But I think the real discussion is about at least coming to some respect for the other person's point of view, finding where it's sophisticated and where it's unsophisticated, and mutually pointing that out, and then going away with a little bit less animosity and the possibility for shaking hands over a policy that makes some kind of sense. That's governance, but it's not happening very much right now. And I think Trump has just been like a superhero for the angry voter, and as I try to tell people, if you vote angry, you're voting wrong, because you're not looking at you're looking for quick fixes, and I'll give an example. Back when we had 9/11 24 years ago, a lot of people I heard in the hospital, you think hospital workers would be more sensitive. They were saying things like, we should just go over and blow them all up, meaning every Arab, and it just comes out. It's like this angry instinct. They're trying to kill us. Let's just kill all of them. And you see some of that going on in the Middle East right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are being
it's
killed.
like they're going to kill us, so let's just kill all them. There's
no
nuance.
First Gulf War was declared. I was in Bishop, California, and went into a store, and this huge guy behind the counter said, and there was actually a gun on the wall behind him. This huge guy behind the counter said, "What do you think about Iraq?" And I stumbled to think, and my journalist friend had a quick neutral answer. And the guy approved it and said, "I think we should bomb those fuckers flat." And you're going, the cradle of civilization, which, why are we doing this? Why are we taking this attitude, this othering, that rather than saying Putin and the Russian government are doing these awful things, Netanyahu and the Israeli government, Hamas are doing these awful things, it's the Israelis, the Russians, the
Right.
Palestinians, that we make a group and make this false distinction by pretending that we're a different kind of human being. We're another species.
John, I'll tell you how I see this. It's painful to think something through
Mm.
because you might have to change your mind along the way.
Oh yeah.
You might have to do more research than you thought.
Mm.
You you know you're a busy person, and it's easier to think in a cliche than it is to think in a 4,000 word explanation
Mm.
of what your point of view is.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main driving force behind all of this. It's we're in a consumer society, especially in the West. People are very busy. They're very frightened that the price of food is going up, and that one thing can lead to thoughts of we're going to die
Mm.
because my bread is more expensive or I don't have enough toilet paper.
Yeah.
There's this fear that if something's taken away, your life is going to be taken away.
Mm.
And that can be fed upon by advertisers, by government, and all of this, where if people would just calm down a little and instead of buying 100 rolls of toilet paper, buy two that'll get you by for a week, we might do a lot better. But that's not the way people behave. And, the market forces are like that too. Wall Street panics overnight if there weren't some uh, levers put in to stop the panic. I mean, we have that down now, I think, because that that's one sign of how idiotic we are
Mm.
in a sense. Let me take all my money out of the bank because um, something Russia did yesterday, you know,
Yeah.
and we can panic quite easily. So I just think that, and the other part of this is that we're entertained by that kind of us them thinking. If we look at most of the big blockbuster movies, they're all about fighting and killing things. The alien, the viper, the immigrant or whatever.
Mm. The serial
You know,
killer.
yeah, we're involved in the matrix all the time in
Mm.
in what sells, and so we're conditioned, I think, to fear the worst and not look at what can be done to preserve what's good.
Mm.
You know, that's just I don't know. I keep hearing people like my relatives overseas or whatever saying, "Boy, the U.S. is in a real mess," you know, and we're not really that bad off, when I'm thinking about it. There are some people having a really difficult time,
Mm.
obviously,
Of course.
but there always has been. But overall, I mean, it's the economy's actually doing a little better than it has, and they're solving issues, continually. Despite the intellectualism, the universities still have great minds working in
Mm.
research, and so I don't think it's that bad. And I think this is the problem of the so-called cult of Trump is they want us to believe that the government, the nation is in really bad shape, and you can only fix it by cutting taxes or some
Right.
simple
I
thing.
was watching Donald Trump and he said that San Francisco has been destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. My friends there don't seem to know it either. Ignorant people. Somebody on my, when I talked with Jeremy Sherman about Trump, somebody came up and said, "Well, what about London and all the crime in London?" So I was in London a couple of weeks ago. It seemed fine. And oh, that's just your personal experience, sort of thing. It's like, yeah, okay, let's not go by that. Let's go by what Donald Trump says about they're eating the cats and dogs instead. And their thing was, well, what about knife crime in London? And you're going, yeah, the media have quite rightly picked up on the fact that we've got more knife crime than we used to have. But the murder rate for the UK, which has 64 million people in, is lower than the murder rate in New York or Chicago. And
Oh yeah.
it has been since the Second World War. So
Yeah.
this isn't the fact that the statistic is going up. Yeah, it's awful that these things are happening, but there are 8 million people in London. And yes, somebody got knifed last week. We don't have any school shootings. We've only, in fact, in our history, had one school shooting. You
Hmm.
get two or three a week in the United States. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of what the measure are. But yes, looking at what it's like being a homeless person in India, as opposed to what it is like having welfare in the United States. There's so much of a difference.
Oh
It,
yeah.
I mean, in talking to somebody who, if somebody's a screaming fanatic, then forget about it. There's no point trying to talk to them. But that 90% or whatever the percentage is are people who might see reason, but will have to be treated with dignity and with respect.
Yeah.
And as you say, the first thing is report to get on side with the person. And what I advocate is actually getting them to talk about it. It's a
Mhm.
method I've used with cult members when I've had to deal with them remotely. If I can talk to somebody one on one, I can, we can do something in a day or two.
Now,
It'll get somewhere.
just so you know, the other side, so to speak, if you're liberal, the conservative side also knows these tactics. Um,
Of
for
course,
instance, Glenn Beck recently quoted Hassan, as you know,
the
and
bite model, yeah, it's
yeah,
wonderful.
the bite
But
model, saying you have to approach the liberal with respect, and then you
mm,
can convince them of your point of view, and in a
mm.
you'll have more success. In other words, it's not wrong, what
No,
he's
and
saying.
and if we're generally advocating polite conversation, agreeable disagreement, then I don't care. It's good that whichever side is promoting it, let's all look at that. But being able to have a conversation, and the first part of that is probably having a conversation about something else. You know,
Hmm.
we in Scientology were taught to
Yeah.
find somebody's reality, and I didn't realize just what an effective tool this is.
Oh,
For
yeah.
what are you interested in talking about?
Sure.
What's and what are you interested in talking about positively? What are the things you like? And with Scientology, you then have this idea of the good roads, fair weather, that you
Hmm.
don't talk about the sensitive subjects. First of all, make sure there is communication possible between you and create some respect.
Well,
Um,
this technique was used early on by the Unification Church recruiters. They would bond with you based on what you liked.
it's
If
used
you
by
like,
ISIS in their recruitment as well, oddly enough.
yeah, yeah. So it's an old technique, a sales technique
Mm,
in a sense, and it can be used for good or ill, obviously,
of
like any
course.
technique can.
Yep.
One of the things that I wonder about, I mean, let's just take, for instance, that Trump wins this election, that
Mm,
every liberal fears, and artist friends of mine want to move to Canada if he wins and all that. Of course they won't, but
yeah.
this is the kind of talk I hear.
Mm.
And and I'm doing a thought experiment. Well, what could possibly happen? You have Trump and Vance in the White House. It's almost comical to think of it from some points of view, but we got through 4 years of Trump before, and we can do it again. What I think is going to happen, this is the big fear of the GOP, it's going to backfire so badly this time
Mm.
because Trump can't stop himself. He'll even fire Vance if he has to in the middle
Of
of this
course.
whole thing.
Of course.
He
Yeah.
will. But I think he will be so ruinous that the GOP will lose their credibility for the next 4 or 5 election cycles.
Mm,
That's the danger for the GOP in supporting Trump.
mm.
It's not that he can ruin the country, but I think he's going to prove to be so bad that the GOP is going to have to go through a complete house cleaning
Mm.
after
And
something like that.
which is already happening to some extent. We've had what 800 senior Republicans say that they are voting Republican, i.e., they are voting for Harris. They are voting
Yes.
to maintain democracy.
Yeah.
But the Trump base, where you're dealing with something that's more emotional, and there's this pretense. Jill Bolt Taylor, a neuroscientist, said something words to the effect that we think that we are thinking creatures with feelings, but we're actually feeling creatures that
Yeah.
think. And I embrace that thought. I accept that in myself, that whatever I feel emotionally. During our Brexit campaign, the most brilliant slogan came out, which was "Take back control." And it's like some deep penetrative phrase. You're saying to people, you'll be able to take back control. Now, as it happens, Brexit caused catastrophe. We're really still reeling from the mess that it made. And the fact that we spent 2 years with our
Yeah,
parliament focused entirely on this, how on earth, and we still haven't worked out the border with Ireland
no.
because we can't. So, and we're stuck without economic deals.
So in other words, Hobbes was wrong.
Hobbes was wrong, and
Yeah.
the,
I
and
mean,
so
in that
so was
sense, he's
Rousseau.
proven, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that and that sort of fundamental idea. Do you believe that? What was the I thou the rabbinical scholar the who he differentiated I and thou as opposed to I and you. Um,
Oh, okay.
what's his name?
Starts
He
with
was
an M.
yeah, it does Martin Buber
Is it Buber? Okay. Well,
Buber
there is a
Martin
Buber.
Buber.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
him. He was in a discussion with Carl Rogers, the founder of Third Force person-centered therapy, humanist therapy. And Rogers said, I think you'd agree with me, Martin, that man is basically good. And Buber paused for a moment and then went, yes, man is basically good and evil. And I
Okay.
think when you go to either of those extremes, when you say, oh, we all have a sweet, lovely nature fundamentally, psychopaths don't. It's
No.
just that way, they don't. Or we have to be controlled and observed and watched, and otherwise we'll be sinful. Either of these extremes becomes very dangerous. And you can appeal to it in people because the QAnon crowd fundamentally seem to believe that man is basically evil, and you've got to
Except for them.
except
Except
for
for them.
them. Yeah,
Right.
that there are a few of us who are angels, and the rest of you are the sons of darkness, the soldiers of darkness.
Or at the very least, you're living in some kind of a la la land of ignorance.
Hmm.
You know, you might not be evil, but you're not doing any good either.
Yeah, you're in the matrix, and you've taken the wrong
You've
colored
chosen the
pill.
blue pill, not the
Yeah,
red pill or whatever. Yeah.
personally, I wouldn't take either of them. I don't trust either of them.
Well, I
But
don't think you can. I mean, it's an imaginary pill. It's like Alice's mushroom. You know, the caterpillar says one side will make you smaller, the other side will make you. There's no side to a mushroom. You know, already the very advice is ridiculous. So Alice just makes up a side, left and right. She makes up left and right.
hmm,
And of course, making it up, the reality does come true for her. She gets big on one side and small on the other. So it's a psychological move. And again, people don't understand that entire thing is again a dream that she was having, and that you cannot apply dream things into literal reality.
if only Freud and
Because
Jung had understood this.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, but yeah,
but
and caterpillars smoking hookers of opium, that's a bit weird, isn't it? I wouldn't take advice from a caterpillar smoking opium, you know?
well, why
Um,
not?
yeah, actually, that's a good point. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
But I think this is what's generally happened, that we adhere to a set of you know rules that seem to make sense to us, whether they come from scripture or they come from a politician, and then inertia compels us to keep going in that direction and believing that. And to change our minds is to accept cognitive dissonance, confusion,
Right, right.
dismay, and to maybe have that awful thought that the ground underneath your feet is not as solid as you thought.
Yeah, so
Um,
I think yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not as solid, and I think that's what the appeal of Trump is that he presents a dream world.
yeah.
You
Simple
know, kind of
certainties.
it's not there is no great America in the past that he's talking about. He never has defined what that greatness was.
No, and he has no
He,
idea of the history of America. Is
no,
it
no, no.
the
Like
Marshall
his
Plan, or is it the Civil War, or is it Woodrow
well,
Wilson?
his favorite president is Andrew Jackson, which tells you a lot about his personality. You know, so but that's as far as it goes. I don't think he can name all, many of the presidents.
Well, he
He
has said that he's the second greatest president of all time after Abe Lincoln. So
oh he did.
yeah, yeah, a few years
Hmm.
ago. But and he apparently wanted to have his face on Mount Rushmore alongside them to cause more devastation to the holy
Well,
site of
I could
Villikota.
carve his face into Mount Rushmore. I might make it 2 inches big, but
Yeah,
I could put it there.
yeah, it's a good plan. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's
we could do we could do a couple thousand faces if we just kept them small enough.
yeah. And there is, there is something. I One of the experts that I came up against because of Scientology was Fletcher Prouty, and Prouty is this fascinating character. The deep state concept. A lot of this is to do with Prouty. He did work with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he said there's a deep state functioning here. And you're kind of going, no, really? You're telling me that the CIA have been doing things that the public don't know about? How terrible.
Yeah.
That's fine. He was very wrong in what he said about Ron Hubbard's intelligence career. By the way, I did manage to
Uh,
take that apart from the very documents he'd used. But he was also an advisor to the film JFK. But he put forward this idea of the deep state, and yeah, there is a cabal of people who are not telling us what they're doing. This is called national security. It's going to function that way, and they have used that privilege to extend their power. And
mhm.
I go with the fundamental thesis that John le Carre put forward, having, of course, worked for MI6 before he started writing novels, where he said, look, espionage there are two things going on here. One is that you have observation of what the opponent country is doing. So you interview defectors, you have academics who are knowledgeable about those areas, and you do that, and that's good and proper and positive. The other part is you infiltrate, sabotage, attack, maim, kill, disfigure. And that's what spying is. And I'm with him. It doesn't work. It
Mhm.
doesn't pay. In fact, Russia had infiltrated all of the Western agencies, the French, the British, and the American. When Ames was found in the CIA, there were 19 other KGB agents at the same time. So this
Yeah.
whole we need a secret state to do this, which is what's underneath all of that, I think is a bad idea. But it has a resonance for me to say that there is a swamp, and that swamp is filled by cronyism among politicians. And the American system, as with all other systems, perpetuates this cronyism. So we look at what's happening with Eric Adams in New York this week, and he's had ostensibly $100,000 worth of free flights and upgrades from Turkish Airlines. So
Yeah.
they've got this email where his girlfriend saying, "Can we go to Chile on holiday?" And he's going, "Cool. Can we go via Istanbul?" It's like, so it's not just Republicans. There are politicians on both sides. What Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor, who's a
Well,
black Nazi and all this. There
yeah,
are politicians on both sides that would be better rid of, and we need a
well, I would
system
even go
better.
further. It's all, not even both, but all sides. Whenever anyone gets in power, you have these problems. I mean, part of the reason I soured on the Democrats when I was a young hippie in the 60s as a college student was, that whole 1968 debacle with Mayor Daley
Mm,
and I mean, you could see corruption in the Democratic Party went pretty deep.
yeah.
And then you look into the Kennedy thing and whatever, and the cronyism, the sense of power, the theater, it pervades politics almost everywhere.
Yeah, power
I
tends
think
to
that,
corrupt. Absolute power,
yeah,
absolutely.
but
So,
I think one of the few exceptions has been someone like Angela Merkel, who I find is a very sensible leader, considering her position, which is hardly one I'd envy, in the middle of the European mess. And
no,
so
she was very
there are
level-headed.
people out there that do pretty well in government, but there tends to be, you're going to see courting favors. Like, you have someone like Zelensky's in an impossible position. His country faces some kind of annihilation. He's going to make deals as much as he can because he's looking for self-preservation for his nation, not just himself. So he's going to come across as wheeling and dealing, which is what he's doing. And unfortunately, war does that to people.
Yeah, I mean, the
You
Dalai
have to
Lama,
cheat, to
the Dalai,
win.
the Dalai Lama scandals taking what more than $3 million in all from Osahara of
Hmm.
Shinrikyo, who's now been executed for his crimes,
Yeah.
and from Keith Raniere.
Yeah.
And you're sort of going, but he's got to keep this community running in Dharamsala and maintain the medieval Tibetan Buddhist ideas.
Right.
So he takes this money from photo opportunities, which have, he is a highly intelligent man, somebody I
Sure he
respect
is.
in his work, but I'm not sure that perpetuating the Tibetan medieval state's that good an idea anyway, frankly.
No, I don't think he believes it himself.
Mm.
I just
And
think he wants to preserve some of his culture, in the modern age, and keep his people from being persecuted. That's
yeah,
that's
having
his
lost
main goal.
something like
I think he
two
understands
million.
that medieval concept isn't going to last,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
and it hasn't. But the problem is the Chinese wanted to impose another weird system onto by persecution onto the Tibetan people, and now they're only preserving enough of Tibetan culture because it's a tourist attraction. They can make money off of it. And much like unfortunately in America, we preserved the noble savage about the Native
Mhm.
Americans after we wiped out 90% of the people with disease mostly and poverty. So yeah, it's almost ironic that the very thing we destroy, then we want to preserve. Like the last tiger. We want to preserve the last Tasmanian tiger, the last Siberian tiger, and we'll go through great lengths and spend $1 billion, genetically preserving things and all this after we've done all this destruction. It's
Bring back the
bizarre.
dodo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're as a species, we're quite bizarre in that sense. But
I was in Cape Town in 1996, and my host um, was bemoaning the lack of native culture. The demise of native culture, that so much was being lost. And I'd never really thought about it. I would just have said yes, that it's a terrible thing. And I suddenly thought about Morris dancing. And in this country,
oh
you have
yeah,
people who, I'm sure Spike will find us a picture, who dress up in
no,
little white.
I knew someone that did Morris dancing in Los Alamos, New Mexico here.
There you go. What a great place to be doing it. And
Yeah.
so I suddenly thought, oh, she's saying that I should be doing that. I hadn't really thought about it this way. And who's going to maintain this culture, and how many cultures actually do remain static, do remain frozen?
No, they don't.
How much do they change? But anyway, returning to the idea, it seems to me that if you can talk to somebody, if you can, maybe apologize if you've been horrible to them before, and recreate relationship, and talk about something that allows, dialogue to take place, for both of you, and then find out what it is, and I do think of this in cultic terms. What was their conversion moment? When was
Mhm.
the moment that they decided that Trump was the best bet?
Well,
And
okay, but yeah, back up a bit because
mm,
most of these people are born and died in the wool of conservatism. They grew up in it and they still maintain it because it's a family tradition. You know, it's the mindless voter. It's my party. I vote for my party. I'm loyal. That's unless something comes up totally egregious that you have to get rid of the person. But
well, but
but
if you think back to the 2016 election, along the way, many senior Republicans ended up only McCain and Romney were going to stick by what they'd said.
right.
Um, but many senior Republicans, right up to the nomination, were saying, no, there's no
Mhm.
way we'll support this guy. So I think there is, and I agree with you. There's the dyed in the wool belief, which is, um, whether welfare is a good idea or not. The difference between
Sure.
fundamental difference between the Democrats and Republicans. If you're down on your luck, should you be spared a dime? In the words of Bing Crosby. That there is there's if there isn't such a point, there isn't. But if somebody, what led you to believe that he would be a good president, and
Mhm.
what do you think he's achieved? And actually open out a conversation that doesn't happen at all with all the brickbats and the megaphoning, which is to get them. And I've always found this useful, right from being a teenager, to get them to describe their beliefs, to get them to tell you what their beliefs. And the reason I found this out as a teenager was because when I was called upon to articulate my beliefs, I sometimes found that I didn't know what I was talking about. And
Yeah.
it's a very useful process to go, oh, yeah. And it's not having somebody who's there's a moment where Jim Carter, as the butler in Downton Abbey, says, "I wanted to be convinced, not defeated." And it's such a
Hmm.
what a statement that we
Yeah.
attack people, we give them evidence, we have an onslaught, instead of going, "You're going to have to persuade yourself. I've got to get you to the place where you're willing to consider the information, but it's not up to me to change your mind." And to
Yeah.
which again, with interventions, when people were like, "Oh, would I get somebody out of Scientology?" It's like, no, I'll offer them the choice to reconsider their
Yeah.
involvement. And it just so happens that after after a while, everybody I talked to did leave.
Yeah.
Um, but that was not my intention. And the same here. My intention is to have somebody reconsider their attachment to Trump, because it's a toxic attachment to believe in such a person. I mean, going back, I'd hoped that the defeat by Trump would have caused the Democrats to clean up, to change the way they behaved. But unfortunately, in America, politics is plutocratic. It's based on money. It's based on who has
Oh
the
yeah.
funding to do
Yeah.
this.
We can't get away from it. Yeah. The lobbyists are very powerful here. They're not going to go away.
No,
And it's just, and I think that's why most Americans don't vote in general, because we don't have to, number one.
mm,
And you're lucky if you even get half the population to vote at a major presidential election.
yeah, same here.
That's how bad it is here.
Mm,
So, and I think the reason is that the average person sees politics as local politics.
mm,
They don't give a crap about keeping up with everything that's going on in Washington. They're hoping those people are smart enough to do their jobs well.
mm.
But I don't know. Maybe it's dangerous to force people to vote like they do in Australia.
Yeah.
If you don't vote, you get fined.
Mm.
So they have over 90% participation. In
And
the
something
US,
like 50 parties on the ballot as well. So
well, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's different in so many other nations, and there's a kind of a fatalism in America. As long as I have my job and my local politics is good, I'm okay. I don't care what's going on in Kentucky or in California, as long as it's okay in Pennsylvania, in my town. That's kind of the parochialism
yeah,
that
I'm all right, Jack is the English expression for
there
it.
you go, there you go. So
Famous
that's a
movie with
big
Peter
part of
Sellers.
it.
Hmm.
Uh, so our election's coming up. I don't know if we're going to have much effect on it with our conversation, but but it's been fun talking about it.
Yeah,
So
I think the principles do apply more broadly, that if you can engage in conversation with people without losing your temper, without belittling them. I mean, that's the thing I see. And yet every night now I watch Jon Stewart or Seth Meyers or Jimmy Kimmel,
oh
and mainly to see the Trump clips, and the Vance clips, which fascinate me. And I watch the debate, and I'll probably watch the Vance debate as well. But so there's a great entertainment value,
yeah,
but there's also this thought. Trump is saying that if he gets in, Jimmy Kimmel and those people, they're going to prison. You
yeah.
know, how, it's like, oh, that can't possibly be true. And it's like, well, he's fixed the Supreme Court, so
Yeah,
he knows
but
what he can do.
there's a lot of other judges in between, and I think most judges aren't going to comply, which they haven't.
No,
So far Trump has not had much success with judges, even the ones he appointed.
well, he's managed to stay out of prison, which, given the offences he's committed, is really quite
Yeah,
something.
that's
Um,
true.
and he's managed not to be sentenced before time. And I imagine he's got a plane ready to go to Argentina at a moment's notice, because otherwise he is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
uh, just some thoughts, and I would urge anybody. I had a few people. We lost, I think, 3 subscribers out of our 9,600 for me talking about Trump. But I think it has to be talked about. And I think we should be able to talk about anything. I keep trying to find somebody who will debate Scientology with me. I found this guy who's a PhD student who believed in Scientology, and I recorded with him. This was a couple of years ago. Really intelligent guy, because I wanted to, have somebody really smart who supported and believed in these things, and
Sure.
go, well, what about this? And the decision, he was willing to do it as long as only he recorded it, and then he'd let me know if we could release it. I never heard from him again, which is a shame
No.
because he's a nice guy. But you know, so I think that discussion and debate. I'm not frightened of the malicious animal magnetism of the
Oh yeah.
suppressive person or anything like that. I'm very happy to debate. So, um, what I'm encouraging is conversation and friendliness, kindness.
Yeah, you bring
Respect
up
for
you bring
others.
up a good point. This fear of some kind of occult or
Mm.
hidden menace out there drives a lot of people's
Yeah.
position, and Trump appeals to magical thinking. That's one of his powers, the idea that you can do better than medicine with the mental power.
Or
That,
bleach.
yeah,
Yeah, look,
and he
Norman Vincent Peale. We talked about cults. We haven't mentioned his cult leader, the cult
no,
leader he
but
grew up with,
that's
Norman
mentioned
Vincent Peale.
in the book to the left of you, The
Mm.
Cult of Trump brings up the whole
Yeah.
Norman Vincent Peale influence in there.
So I'm
That's quite well
presuming that,
done.
that that our audience won't actually have been able to absorb the content of the book by my just. Though I did critique Benjamin Zeller for writing a paper about it from having only seen a leaflet promoting it.
Oh
But
yeah,
so I hope people will read Steve's book. A new edition of it's just coming out
yeah.
at the last minute, and I was really impressed by it, I must say. And I have to
No,
say that to
he
Steve's
did a
friend.
good
But
job. I mean,
yeah.
it's a difficult topic,
Mm,
to get down, and obviously it has this sensational circus atmosphere to it
mm.
when you write about this guy, unfortunately. But that's what it is. I
It
just,
yeah.
I'd like to let this go by saying that if he does by some chance win, I think that the whole victory in quotes is going to blow up in the GOP's face
Mm.
because of what he will do, and
Yeah.
and what he's incapable of doing. He's incapable of following through with an intelligent program.
Mm. Well, and
And
let's hope that it causes reform that throughout the
yeah,
political system. That let's hope that the electoral college system. We had a poll where 58% of responders said they thought it was time to get rid of the electoral college system. I
yeah,
think only 31 wanted to keep it, and it's primitive. This idea that Hillary
right.
Clinton got 2.9 million more votes than Trump, but still wasn't president.
Yeah,
I am not a fan of Hillary Clinton. Um, I'm not a fan generally of the Democrats, but I must say that when Biden stepped aside and we're all kind of going, he's finished. He can't do this. He's just too old. He can't do it. Bless him.
hmm
Whatever his virtues may be. When she came forward, I was kind of, oh no. And so I then went and watched as much documentary material as I could about her. And I think a
yeah,
lot of it is you get the feel for the person. So I have watched tens of hours of Trump material in the last 10 years. Stuff that was filmed when he was in his 20s, right on
uh-huh.
through what his friends say about him, all of these things. And I come away going, as you said earlier, he can't finish a sentence. He
Yeah,
doesn't have a thought in his head. It's all about, all of these ads, this is your favorite president. Trump watches, $100,000. I've ordered 10 of them. The Trump $31 worth of silver for $100 medal. The Trump cards in which I am Superman. It's kind of, this is meant to be a presidential campaign.
well, this is the Marvel Comics version of reality.
Yeah.
It's what we're facing here, and I think to
I
the
think you're insulting Marvel, frankly, but
well, but Marvel knows what it is,
uh, Captain
and
America,
yeah, and
great Captain
that's the
America great
difference.
again.
Marvel knows that it's fantasy and entertainment,
Mm,
but it's also appealing to very real, fundamental urges and perceptions in human beings,
mm,
and it's hit a nerve. I mean, Marvel has been successful because of that.
mm.
These
Quite rightly.
archetypes that they put up there, the Batman and
Mm.
and whatever are very successful in appealing to the inner person, especially the male. And then there's Wonder Woman for the female.
Hmm.
You know, they throw some women in there now and then.
And of course, it was worked out during World War II that the style starts in the late 30s, and the evil Nazis very readily, give this polarized view of the positive superhero and the negative superhero.
Yeah,
And of course, we got Eartha Kitt as Catwoman. I watched a great document. I watched an interview with her. She was 74 years old, and she gave this interview. I had no idea what had happened between her and Johnson. That in 1968, she attends a White House luncheon with 50 women, and to talk about juvenile delinquency, and with Lady Bird Johnson, and Lyndon Baines Johnson walks into the room, and it's on film. I found the film of it afterwards, and she says, I don't think juvenile delinquency is the problem. I think adult delinquency is the problem, that people
uh,
can't spend enough time with their kids because they're having to work so hard to feed them. And LBJ says, well, we've just brought in a Social Security Act that will give daycare for the children. And he bolts, he leaves the room. She's beaten him. And then she
yeah,
says, this Vietnam War thing's a bad thing. And then she has 10 years of, as she puts it, being whitelisted. She could
yeah,
not get a gig in America for 10 years. And you're going, I
right.
thought it was Nixon that had enemies. I thought it was the Republicans that did that. No, it's both sides. They're
Yeah.
both willing to do it.
Yeah, it's the arrogance of power. You know, if you offend me, I will get rid of you
Yeah,
idea. So, John, it's been wonderful talking to you again, and hope we do it
as
again
always.
soon.
Great.
Okay.
Yep, let's sort that out. Thanks a lot, Joe. That's
Take care. Bye bye.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.